Hey, Vince McMahon, it's time for this week's Stick to Wrestling podcast.
Who the hell do you think you are?
Stay on the scene like a loving machine when you're listening to the Stick to Wrestling podcast. I want to thank James Brown for writing that song about his favorite wrestling podcast, Stick to Wrestling. My name is John McAdam. I am the host of this. And if you give us 60 minutes, perhaps indeed, we will give you a rawbone podcast. Now, I've asked the question before, is there another wicked good podcast out there? How about we ask this guy, sir, is there another good wrestling podcast out there?
No.
Not even another wicked good podcast. If you want to follow me on Twitter, put in John McAdam in the search and follow the guys fighting with chairs. You want to be part of our Facebook group. If you go to Facebook and search Stick to Wrestling, it comes right up. Let me give you an example why. Anthony Aragona independently asked if I watched the old Bedlam from Boston show on the local channel 25 back in like 82, 83. Yes, I did. This show was an unmitigated disaster. Sometimes it was on. Sometimes it wasn't. That's the only way I can describe their schedule. If it's 10:05 and there's still an old movie playing, you could assume it wasn't coming on. It was filmed in a local studio, and they could not fill one row of seats on the hard camera. Like, they didn't even think to tell the wrestlers to just bring their friends and family members so it doesn't look so bad on TV. Not one row of seats on the hard cam. And to tell you a little bit about like what this show was like, they had someone they had a heel tag team called the Soul Brothers, and they had someone in the audience with a sign, a cardboard sign, and it said "Soul Bros Stink," and it had stick figures on it. But it gets better. The Soul Brothers were tormenting this wrestler who was in street clothes. His name was Tony Ulysses. And it was 2-on-1, and Tony Ulysses was not backing down, and he took off his shirt to reveal that he had a Superman T-shirt underneath the shirt, and the Soul Brothers got scared and ran away. This is the local wrestling we got, and I don't think they were trying to be funny. I think they thought this would be entertaining and it would draw people in. I didn't see every episode because it was on Sunday morning, and sometimes I had to work or play baseball or sleep, whatever, but I did see a few shows, and they were a complete disaster. And with that question out of the way, I want to introduce a newcomer to the Stick to Wrestling guest seat, Mr. Dave Flaherty. Dave, thank you for taking the time and coming on.
My pleasure. How are you guys?
I'm doing really good. It's a good Sunday out here in New Hampshire. Dave, before we get started with the wrestling
Wait. Is there such a thing as a good Sunday in New Hampshire?
Not well, when the Patriots win, yeah, but not today.
And I guess you didn't hit a moose on your way home with your car?
We don't have moose down here. We're like Metro Boston down here, but if you go a little bit north, I mean, I've seen moose. Dave grew up in Florida watching Florida Championship Wrestling. I'm going to hear all kinds of cool stories from him. But before we do that, Dave, I mean, Eddie Van Halen recently passed away. We're still kind of hurting from that. Do you have an Eddie Van Halen story that you want to share with us? I know it's not sticking to wrestling, but I want to hear the cool story.
Yeah, I worked in the music industry for around 24 years, retail, wholesale, and when Judas Priest did their first United States tour, I was a huge fan. They played the Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia, opening for, I don't know if anybody you remember, a crappy band called Starz, S-T-A-R-Z.
I remember Starz.
Yeah, and REO Speedwagon was the headliner. I wanted to see them so bad, I called, I worked for Peaches Records and Tapes, a semi-national retail chain at the time, got 7th row center seats at the Fox Theater, smuggled a mono cassette player into the show, walking down the aisle, looked over to the soundboard, and there's this short, fat guy with long hair and a beard standing there. And I'm going, okay, I guess he works for the band. Judas Priest played a 4-song, 25-minute set, and I'm pissed. I flew to Atlanta just for this, and I looked at my buddy Mike, and I said, Mike, let's get the hell out of here. These two bands suck. We walk out. We're in the lobby. I look over, and there I see the guy at the soundboard, the same guy. And I walked up to him. He had an all-access badge on a lanyard around his neck. And I said, hey, man, you work for Judas Priest? He said, yeah. What's your name? I said, Dave. I said, you know where Fort Lauderdale, Florida is? He said, yeah, I do. Why? I said, I flew up here just to see Judas Priest. 4 songs? I'm pissed off, man. And he says, that's all we're allowed to play? And I said, I want to at least meet the band. I work in the music industry. I want to at least meet the band before I fly back tomorrow. He goes, all right, come over to Holiday Inn tomorrow. Call my room. John Blackburn was his name. We go over there on our way to the airport, and he doesn't answer, and I figured, okay. I called Glenn Tipton's room. Glenn answers the phone. He says, yeah, we heard about you, mate. Come on up. And I got to meet the band, and I met their manager. Ended up in Los Angeles, and I happened to be unemployed at the time. Judas Priest were touring for the Hellbent for Leather album. Played the Starwood in Los Angeles, and a girl that worked in the New York office, Debbie, she was always great. She said, Dave, you still unemployed? And I said, yeah. She goes, you used to play drums? And I said, I dabbled. And she said, could you set up Les's kit? We need to fire the drum roadie. He had a substance abuse problem with a month left on the tour supporting UFO. And I said, yeah, I can do it. And so they hired me the next day. We ended up in Seattle about 5 days later. And Kenny Downing, KK Downing, I used to hang out with him a lot more than any other guy in the band. And we were staying in the Edgewater in Seattle, the hotel on the bay where Led Zeppelin had their famous little tete-a-tete with a groupie. And Kenny and I are in the elevator going to the gig. We're going down to the ground floor. The elevator stops, and there's about 4 or 5 people, and in this group is Eddie Van Halen. And Kenny says, Dave, it's fucking Eddie Van Halen. And I said, yeah, Ken, it is, man. Wow. And he goes, Dave, it's fucking Eddie Van Halen. I said, yeah, okay, man. Yeah, that's cool. And he goes, Dave, I can't believe it. And I said, Ken, yeah, come on, man, it's cool. So, the group splits up. Eddie walks into the elevator. And he looks at Kenny and he goes, KK Downing. Jesus Christ, man, Judas Priest, the Ripper, Sad Wings of Destiny, Victim of Changes. And Ken's like out of his mind. And it was like mutual admiration. I'm standing there watching this, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe what the hell I'm experiencing right now. We get to the bottom floor, and Eddie, walks out, and he goes, KK, man, this was so cool meeting you. And he walked away, and Kenny looks at me, and he goes, Dave, I can't believe what just fucking happened. I said, all right, Ken, come on, man, let's go to the gig. It's time to play. I said, just, when you're playing center tonight, just remember when you're going apeshit with your vibrato bar and your wah-wah pedal, just remember you met Eddie fucking Van Halen tonight, and just go to town, bro. It was amazing. It was absolutely freaking amazing. There are times like this, and I just think back of all the cool shit that happened to me in my, my years in the music industry and the people I met. I wish there were these friggin' smartphones back then.
Oh, yeah.
But it was amazing.
You sound like a music version of me, and that is a cool story. And you didn't hang out to hear Starz, Starz, perform Cherry Baby. My goodness.
They sucked. I didn't have time.
I just remember that song being on the radio in 6th grade. And
yeah,
that's all I know about them. But anyway, big fan of Florida wrestling. You tell us a little bit about how you first started watching wrestling. Like, when did you start watching, and what was your introduction to Florida wrestling?
Little kid moving down here from Natick, Massachusetts, with the sorry excuse of a man that impregnated my mom. He got a job down here in the hotel industry. We moved down here. Within a year and a half, I had a stepmother who was pregnant, and my mom and I were living with her stepmother and her 3 children, my 2 uncles and my aunt. The eldest uncle, he's about 6 or 7 years older than me, dysfunctional family, but we were sharing a very small 3-bedroom house. This is like the early 60s. My oldest uncle, Fran, slept on the couch. He was the man of the house. And he used to watch the Florida wrestling show from the West Palm Beach network or station that came on at midnight, Saturday night / Sunday morning. And he never wanted to wake up me and Jeff, my other uncle, who's actually younger than me. You know, it shows you what a fucked up situation this family was. But anyways, after about 2 weeks, he comes in and he goes, guys, wake up. You got to see this. And he kept telling us before this night about these guys, the Kentuckians, Luke Brown and Grizzly Smith, about how big they were. He was telling us about the Assassins. This is like 1963, 1964. Duke Kiyomoka and Hiro Matsuda. One of the first babyface teams back then was Don Curtis and Mark Lewin. Mark Lewin, the Purple Haze. Don Curtis, the first guy that I ever saw use a sleeper hold. And then I just got enamored. I was hooked. I couldn't miss watching it on a Saturday. Gordon Soley. He was like Walter Cronkite. He made you think that what you were watching was a legitimate athletic contest. Eddie Graham, you know, he was the booker, you know, he was all about making it look real, everything. But the talent that came through Florida was just beyond belief. The great Malenko, the greatest heel I've ever seen, along with Bobby Shane. Johnny Valentine, Hiro Matsuda. I don't know if any of you guys in the Northeast ever saw him live. You probably didn't, but a phenomenal professional wrestler. Just growing up in Florida and just the talent that came through here, you know, going to the Miami Beach Auditorium, you know, Barry Rose lists cards daily from Florida year by year, day by day. And I'd see these shows that I was at the Miami Beach Auditorium, like an 8-match card. You know, you got guys like Bill Watts, Buddy Colt, Paul Jones, Tim Woods, you know, all involved in the top 3-4 matches on the card. And like the 3rd match on the card, Danny Hodge against Hiro Matsuda. And, you know, back then I'm going, okay, you know, these guys are great wrestlers. But now I look at them, I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe I saw this kind of stuff. You know, Tony Charles. You know, I always loved the guys from England, you know, because, you know, they were into chain wrestling. And Tony Charles to this day had the best drop kick I've ever seen in my life. Closest is Skip Young, Sweet Brown Sugar. They both had the same style. I don't know if Skip Young ever saw Tony Charles, but Tony would be standing within a foot and a half of his opponent. He'd jump up, curl his legs underneath him, and just explode his legs and kick the living shit out of his opponent. And you'd sit there and you go, my God, how could that not be real? How could that not hurt? You know? And it was just so believable. You know, yeah, it was incredible.
I've never seen Tony Charles throw a drop kick, and I'm going to have to seek that out, because if he had a better drop kick than Skip Young or Jim Brunzell, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Believe me, man, when Tony Charles threw a drop kick, me and my friends' jaws dropped. You know, it's like, oh my God. It was phenomenal. He was the first, you know, I mean, maybe Skip Young did it better. He was bigger. He was more athletic. But just whenever Tony Charles threw a drop kick, man, back then you would just go, Jesus Christ, man, is that guy's thorax in the same shape as it was 5 minutes ago?
Really? You know? I mean, third match of the Boston Garden was like S.D. Jones against Moose Monroe, and you're getting filet mignon on the third match.
I got to tell you guys, when some of the guys came down from the Northeast, you know, that were like upper card guys, you know, they'd come down here, we would go, okay, what's the big deal? Case in point, Smasher Sloan, Crusher Verdue, Baron Mikel Cicluna, even Tony Parisi and Danucci came down here. Pedro Morales, and Florida fans are going, okay, wow, all right. Me and one of my friends that used to go to the shows 3 times a week, as I got older, we were going to house shows 3 times a week. And one of my friends, Wayne Bruno, we heard Bruno was wrestling on one of the big St. Pete cards on Saturday night. They used to have them like once a month. And we're going, hey, let's go. Hey, let's go. Road trip. Let's just see what the big deal is. Bruno was wrestling Tanaka. Okay, and I'm thinking, okay, Bruno wrestled Tanaka up in the Northeast. It was like maybe the third to the main event of the show. And we're sitting there, the match is going on, and the crowd was dead. It was like Bruno was like punch kick. It was like he was boring to us.
3 times a week?
We would go to
over here.
Me and my friends would go to house shows 3 times a week. This is back in the 70s. There was nothing to do. Monday and Wednesday night, you go out to a bar. There's nothing happening in Fort Lauderdale. Wrestling, we were apeshit over it. We would go to West Palm Beach on Monday night. Wednesday night was Miami Beach. And for a long time, there was no wrestling allowed in Fort Lauderdale because of a riot that was caused by George the Blimp Harris and Aldo Bogny and Bronco Lubitsch. They finally started shows at the National Guard Armory, which is still about 10 blocks from where I live right now. And we would set up the ring there because we got, we were going to the matches and a lot of the wrestlers got to know us because we go talk to them. I'm still very good friends with Bob Roop to this day. I introduced Bob Roop to his wife.
Wow.
I introduced Bob Roop to his wife. I went to one of the Barry Rose's fan fests, and I saw Bob. I hadn't seen him in years. The last time I saw him was when I was living in Los Angeles. This is a true story. I swear to you, this is God's honest truth. I was laying on Venice Beach one Saturday, and I see this. This is like when I was maybe 1980, and I see this body running down the beach towards me, just jogging along the beach. And I'm going, and the closer he got to me, I'm going, wait a minute. I've seen this. Something's weird here. The closer he got, I sat up and I stood up and I'm going, that's Bob. And I walked down to the water line, and sure enough, it was him. And I said, hey, Bob, what are you doing out here? And he stops and he goes, Dave, what are you doing here? Embrace. I said, Bob, what the fuck's going on here, man? And he said, Dave, I just came back from Japan. I did a month tour for Baba, and I'm working on this movie with Sylvester Stallone called Paradise Alley. And I'm going, wow, man, that's pretty freaking cool. And he goes, yeah. And I said, so Japan, huh? I said, I heard the money's good there. And he goes, yeah, it is. It's very good. And I said, how much? And he goes, it's none of your goddamn business. Well, Bob and I always got along so well. Bob was one of the only guys, me and my friends, we'd always go back and talk to the wrestlers. John, I told you once a long time ago, I got to meet Bobby Shane, which was like one of the biggest thrills of my freaking lifetime. But Bob was always the coolest wrestler. He was always a babyface. When he turned heel, I walked up to him the following week in Miami Beach Convention Hall. And I said, hey, Bob, am I still allowed to talk to you? And he goes, well, are we friends? And I said, I like to think so. And I said, but you're a bad guy. And he goes, who the fuck cares, Dave? He says, you're my friend. We're friends, man, of course, But, yeah, I introduced him to his wife. She passed away a couple of years ago. But one of the most amazing things, I hadn't seen Bob in a long time. And I went to Barry's Fan Fest in Tampa. And I walked up to him in the hotel lobby on Saturday morning. And, I said, hey, Bob, how are you doing? And he goes, oh, Dave, my God. He gave me a hug and said, Dave, I want you to meet somebody. And he introduced me to his and Molly's son, one of his 2 sons. His name was Kyle. And I looked at him and I said, Kyle, I'm kind of responsible for you being here. And he goes, what do you mean? And Bob said, Kyle, Dave introduced me to your mother. I was like, I'm going to start crying. Because Bob's wife, Molly, was one of the most beautiful human beings I'd ever met in my life. You know, I took her and this girl I was dating. They were best friends. I took them to, you know, this girl I was dating, Gina, she said, Dave, how come I never see you on Wednesday nights? And I said, because I'm at the Miami Beach Convention Hall watching wrestling. She goes, when are you going to take me? And I said, okay, we'll go next week. And Molly said, can I come? And I said, of course you can, Molly. And of course, I wanted to impress both of them. And I took them back, and Molly and Bob hit it off. They ended up getting married. Growing up in Florida, guys, it was amazing. The quality of wrestling down here. When you saw you'd go to shows. I mean, even Monday and Friday nights. Monday night was West Palm. They also ran a show in Orlando. Friday nights was Fort Lauderdale. They also ran a show in Tallahassee. More often than not, Orlando and Tallahassee were the A shows that night. We got the scrappings, the B shows. But just think, if you put those two lineups together on one card, my God, that's, you know, just Florida, just the way the product was presented. And of course, Gordon Soley adding the legitimacy. It was amazing. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
I used to get Florida wrestling on cable. I got it for like a year, like summer of 82 through about the summer of 1981. And the quality.
Yeah, those are the crap years. I mean, in the 70s, I mean, my God, you know, seeing Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe going to 90-minute Broadways, you never got tired of it. You never did. You know, it was wrestling. I mean, it was, you know, it wasn't fighting. There wasn't no blood, but you were enthralled with what was going on in the ring. I mean, it was never boring. You know, now people would probably think it was as boring as reading a dictionary, but back then it was a clinic. And it was well worth. I mean, when Dory and Jack wrestled on the main event of a card, it was a guaranteed sellout. And you better get your tickets quick. It was must see.
I thought the stuff I saw in the early 80s was phenomenal. So if it was even better before that, just wow.
Yes, it was. I mean, it was good because I had just moved back here from Los Angeles in 81. And what I loved was when David Von Erich came down here. I thought that was freaking incredible. You know, they brought him down, you know, show him how to be a heel, you know, and he was tremendous. But, and I'm going to say it right now, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me. I never, ever liked the Kevin Sullivan devil stuff.
I was going to ask about that.
Never.
I mean, my understanding is that did not go over very well.
It was too over the top. It wasn't Florida wrestling that I grew up with. It wasn't about the gimmick. It was about what happened in the ring. You know, as far as gimmicks and, you know, back when I grew up in Florida, okay, yeah, you had the Mongolian Stopper, Archie Gouldy. But, you know, he pulled it off. I mean, it wasn't about the gimmicks. That's why you never saw the Sheik down here, because Eddie knew, yeah, okay, you know, the guys, you know, this gimmick, but, you know, who the hell wants to see him get in the ring, you know, and pull out a freaking gimmick, you know, with his pencil or whatever after 5 minutes? Florida fans aren't going to like that. They want to see wrestling. They want to see guys like Briscoe, the Funks, Bill Watts, Tim Woods. They just wanted to see wrestling. You know, it wasn't about gimmicks and all that bullshit. You know, I never liked the Kevin Sullivan stuff. Hey, if I get a lot of heat for it, I don't care.
I'm surprised, number one, that I think maybe it was different down there, that you could take two attractive girls to a wrestling match. We knew better than to do that in Boston until deep in the Hogan era. I mean, Boston Garden was just a madhouse. But
John, it's because I was the one that was taking them, so.
Okay. I think you would have been outnumbered up here. But anyway, you were at the Miami Beach Convention Center, I think it was, the night Jack Briscoe lost the NWA title to Terry Funk.
One of the greatest nights of my life. One of the greatest nights of my life. One of my group of fans, it was four of us, was me, Wayne, Butch, and Aaron. Wayne was a huge Jack Briscoe mark. I mean, huge. Even when we knew that the business was a work, Wayne still insisted. When it was a world title match, it was real. Like, Wayne, no, go, just keep your love affair with Jack going on. So anyways, that night, it was supposed to be Jack defending against Dory. Aaron called me up. He said, Dave, me and him were the only two guys going that night out of our group of four. So Aaron said, Dave, have you heard from Wayne? I said, no. And he said, I don't know if he wants to go. And I said, well, I don't care. Come on, Aaron, let's go. It's Wednesday night. There's nothing else to do. So Aaron said, I'm going to call him, and he said, if you don't hear from back me, I'll come pick you up. So, Aaron comes and picks me up, and he said, Wayne said he doesn't want to go. He's seen the Jack Dory matches enough already, and he knows Jack's not going to lose. And I'm going, okay. So we get there. And word is around the hall, because, immediately me and Aaron go back, and Bruce Owens, who I've known for years and years, legendary in his own mind, wrestling referee. We walk back to where the guys, where the dressing room was, and Bruce says, hey, Dave, Dory's a no-show. Terry's here. He's going to take Dory's place. And I'm going, really? So I love Terry Funk. Terry Funk's one of my favorite wrestlers ever. And all of a sudden, we see there's cameras there. Whenever there were cameras at a house show in Florida, you knew something was going to go on. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Back then, the only time the NWA title changed hands was in particular cities: Tampa, Houston, St. Louis, Toronto. Never in my mind would I think that the NWA world title would change hands in Miami Beach. Now, be that as it may, I always thought it was perfect because Miami Beach, Cassius Clay beat Sonny Liston in this very building. What a perfect place for an NWA World Heavyweight Championship title to change. That was always in my mind, but I figured it's never going to happen. And it happened that night. It was a surreal moment. When Terry walked out, me and Aaron knew. The crowd was surprised. And then when Terry pinned Jack, it was, still to this day, guys, I can't, I tell, it's wrestling, but it's one of the greatest nights of my frigging life. I will never forget it. So anyways, so we leave, and we're going to meet Wayne at the bar that we always hang out in Fort Lauderdale, which is still close to where I live right now, 2 blocks away. And I said, Aaron, put the foot in the gas. We got to get back to the quarterdeck and just, drive Wayne frickin' nuts. We get there, and we walk in. I said, hey, Wayne, should have went tonight. Jack lost. And he's going, fuck you, Dave. And I'm going, Wayne, he lost. Terry Funk won. He said, wait a minute, it was Terry. No, it was Dory. He was supposed to be there. I said, Wayne, Dory wasn't there. Terry took his place. They gave some lame excuse. Terry won. Read the Miami News tomorrow. Miami had 2 newspapers, the Miami Herald and the Miami News. Miami News used to always print the results on Thursday morning. I said, Wayne, buy fucking Miami News tomorrow, man. Read it. Your boy lost. It was beyond belief. Me and Jeff Bowden went to Nashville to see Flair and Steamboat. That was incredible. But seeing Terry beat, I respected Jack Briscoe for the wrestler that he was, but I was always a heel fan, but I always had a hard-on for Jack, for baby faces. But Jack, because down here in Florida, he was rammed down our throats. Jack Briscoe really? This, Jack Briscoe that. Yeah, like he walked on water, because he was Eddie Graham's guy. And I got tired of it. A number of people did, but I always liked heels. I was never a big babyface fan. The only babyface I really liked when I was a kid, one of my first favorite wrestlers back then when I was a little kid was Red Bastien. He had a program, a feud with Johnny Valentine down here, and then there was the Gladiator, Rick Hunter. Me and one of my best friends, my 2 best friends in the world, Greg Good, me and him used to watch wrestling every Saturday, and all of a sudden here comes this guy, the Gladiator, and all of a sudden he's wrestling like a babyface. He's got a mask on and a Olympic singlet, and I'm going, Greg, guy's got a mask on, but he's wrestling like a good guy. And the Gladiator / Rick Hunter was the first guy that I ever saw that he did the standing suplex. Lift a guy up, hold him over, and suplex him, or as Gordon Solie used to say, suplex. First guy I ever saw do it. Don Curtis, first guy I ever saw use a sleeper hold. Bob Orton Sr., Bob Orton Jr.'s father, first guy that ever used the pile driver back in the early 60s. It was outlawed. If Bob Orton Sr. gave somebody a pile driver, it was a big friggin' deal. It was almost like attempted murder. That's how the product was put over down here. And it was amazing. I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky to have grown up in Florida.
I'm the same way you were with Masked Guys. The first time I saw a photograph of Mil Mascaras, I automatically assumed he was a heel. Same thing with Mr. Wrestling 2. And what a surprise.
Right.
Masks aren't just for the heels in wrestling.
Yeah. But, just to see Rick Hunter, the Gladiator, was the first guy. And then, and another one, Joe Scarpa.
Yep.
You got him as Chief J Strongbow. I was at a Charlotte Fan Fest, and I used to hang out with, around Jim Cornette's table a lot. Diamond Dave, how you doing? Did you have a good time last night? Yeah, I did, Jim. I went out and ate a Vicodin on the plane on the way up. I went to a titty bar. And Dave, I can't believe you're fully pickled. I can't believe it. So anyways, I was hanging out with him, a day or two later, and, I saw a program, and it was Joe Scarpa it was an old Florida program. And I said, Jim, I want to buy it. And he said, well, hey, he's right down there. Why don't you go have him autograph it? And I said, okay. So I bought it, and I went up and I said, Joe, and he goes, no, Chief J Strongbow. I said, no, you're not. You're Joe Scarpa. I said, I just bought this program. Could you autograph it for me as Joe Scarpa? And he said, no. And I said, wow, man, why not? And he said, because I'm Chief J Strongbow. I said, no, you're not. I said, you're an asshole. And I walked away from him.
But unfortunately, that story falls in line with many Chief J Strongbow stories that are out there.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
This podcast might not exist without Chief J Strongbow. So there we have it. I loved him as a kid. Hey, we've got a couple. I was 10. What can I tell you? Hey, we've got a couple of questions I want to touch on. This is a really big one. Sean Olmstead asks, when Dusty Rhodes left and took his crew with him, which was Barry Windham, Mike Rotundo, Black Bart, and Ron Bass, just how devastating was it to the territory?
Brutal. It got to the point where I didn't care whether I watched the Saturday show or not.
Wow.
But I still watched it because it was wrestling. Honestly, I don't watch wrestling anymore on TV. I don't watch any of it. I have no interest in it whatsoever. But back then, when you are enamored, when you have to see everything you want to see, yeah. But Florida, once Dusty left, a lot of the talent followed him, and it just deteriorated. I mean, there were instances where every once in a while, I'll give you an example, Samu, the Samoan Samu.
I remember him in Florida.
When he was here, I would see him, I'm going, wow, he is fucking good, man. Interesting story. I was talking to him, me and a former friend of mine who I used to go to the matches with, War Memorial Auditorium. We were standing outside the heel dressing room, and you're talking to Sam, very cool guy, very laid back. And this guy walked up to him, a black dude, and he started just berating Samu unbelievably, calling him all kinds of names. And Sam just, had enough. And, the black dude said, man, you're nothing but an effing piece of shit. And Sam spit on him, spit in his face. And I'm going, oh, my God. And I'm looking at my friend at the time, Robert. I'm going, Bob, man, this is serious. And Sam stood there and he goes, hey, man, all right, what are you going to do about it? And the black guy says, man, I live like 10 blocks from here. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go get my gun. I'm going to come back. I'm going to kill your ass. I said, dude, man, calm down. Do you really think it's worth it? It's just wrestling. He says, the motherfucker spit on my face. I said, you deserved it. But Samuel was great, man. He was just athletic. I mean, you could just see it. He had it. I guess he had his issues, but one of the things back then, going back to the Kevin Sullivan thing, I got to be very good friends with Angel Vachon, with Luna. I was at her wedding when she got married to Tom Nash. I still miss her immensely to this day. I mean, she was a very good friend of mine. She's come over to my apartment and hang out with me. But other than that, it was the drizzling shits compared to what I was used to back when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, in the 70s. It was crap. It was garbage. It got to the point I couldn't watch it anymore. I mean, I did, but, the only time I watched it was because there was nothing else on television. But, I mean, Lou Perez and, the crap with, the Candyman. I mean, when Dusty came back, after his, the thing with Crockett, the PWF, it's like, it's freaking horrible, But the best, a couple of the Battle of the Belts shows were really good. I mean, that's when here comes Keiji Muto. I mean, the ninja, oh my God, who is this guy? All of a sudden he's a baby face and he's doing his moves. And it's like, oh my God. Every once in a while you would see something that like, wow, yeah, this makes me want to keep watching it. But other than that, I mean, Ed the Bull Gander, God rest his soul. I was at War Memorial the night Luger and Brody, the Cage. I was there that night.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sitting there going, what the fuck is going on here? Brody's not cooperating, and Luger, I mean, it was beyond belief. But, well, I don't know. I don't want to say even better, but a few weeks, maybe a month later, there was another incident in War Memorial Auditorium, which basically killed the town. The main event was Ed the Bull Gantner against, I think it was Mike Rotunda. And Oliver Humperdinck was Gantner's manager. Bill Alfonso had his issues with, whatever. And he freaked out in the ring. Alfonso lost it. He cowered down in the corner during the main event. It was 5 minutes into the main event of a crappy card, but it was still a house show in Fort Lauderdale on a Wednesday night. And he started taking his shirt off because he was so high. And Humperdinck's in ringside, and Rotunda's looking at him, at Humperdinck going, what the fuck's going on here? And they created this like little thing where Humperdinck eventually jumped up in the ring and, diffused the situation. It was ugly. Here's the main event of a card, Ed the Bull Gander against Mike Rotunda. I think it was Rotunda. And it was just, that's how, I mean, drugs, it was kind of out of control in Florida for a couple of years with drugs, with the shit, with blow.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of did it too. And I think a lot of guys are thinking, hey man, my last resort, I'll go down to Florida, Dusty doesn't want me in Crockett's territory, whatever. It just was garbage. It was horrible. It was sad to see. It really was. For me, it was incredibly sad to see, but, the business was changing. Vince, New York, he dominated and nobody had a chance, It was sad. Sad to see.
Yeah, I mean, especially, it's sad for all of us, even WWF fans who were used to the old Bruno Backlund style of wrestling. Now we've got this Hulk Hogan stuff, and it was completely different.
Yeah.
And like when Dusty left, they tried to replace him. I don't even know if they tried to replace him or not, but the top guys on the show.
You couldn't replace Dusty.
What's that?
You couldn't replace him. He was a freaking icon here.
Yeah.
I mean, he was irreplaceable.
Here's the thing. They tried having guys like Brian Blair, Scott McGee, and Mike Graham in the main events, and those guys were really good in the ring, but I just don't think they were going to draw a crowd. But then they tried something different. A guy named Lex Luger, who, had not been a wrestler before, and they pushed him as a top attraction from day one. What did this look like to you?
Bottom line, horrible. I mean, he looked great, but you could tell within a month or two after seeing him, he had no clue about the business. They say Hiro Matsuda trained him. He came from playing football, but it was all about the look. But the important thing was he didn't give a shit about the business. He had no respect for it. All of a sudden, I guess it was like, hey, I got a chance to make some money because I'm too much of an asshole to be with an NFL team. Total opposite of Ron Simmons. Ron Simmons embraced the opportunity of going from, football to wrestling. Ron Simmons embraced it. He understood, hey, man, I can have a career in this, and this is kind of cool. I like this. To me, Luger never liked it. He never respected the business. And if you don't respect the business, man, you have no business being in it. You have no business being in it because, sooner or later, you're going to get exposed. Yeah, you could have the body of a Greek god, but if deep down inside, if you're a pussy and you're in a shoot fight and you can't handle it, yeah, there goes your credibility. I bet Bill Watts, I don't ever think Bill Watts would have even, he would have probably gave Luger, hey, listen, man, you just, you don't have it in my book, man. I never bought into Lex Luger, never. He just seemed to me like a smug, arrogant, big bodybuilder asshole that didn't respect the wrestling business, and I'll just leave it at that. I saw him at a fan fest in Charlotte. I wanted to feel sorry for him because he was in such bad shape physically. This may sound heartless to say, but I couldn't, because he's still sitting there trying to make money off of a business that he never respected. I mean, if that sounds heartless, I'm sorry, but that's how I feel.
No, I thought it was interesting that Florida stopped pushing guys like Brian Blair and Mike Graham, and they went after former football players from the state of Florida. You had Luger, who played at Miami. You had Ron Simmons, who was a huge deal at Florida State. Jim Ross probably made all of you aware of that years ago. And Ed Gantner, who was a big star for the South Florida Bulls. And, I mean, Gantner, like, his name came up earlier, but, I mean, that guy was bad.
Honestly, I don't think Florida wrestling fans ever got over the hangover of Dusty leaving. Once Dusty left, it was over.
Yeah.
It would never be the same. It could never, because now they're competing with Turner. They're competing with Crockett. They're competing, Mid-South, world class. I mean, there would be Saturday nights in the mid-'80s on a Saturday night. My friend would come over and, we would sit here and just drink beer and, do the shit. And we'd, watch the Turner show from 6 to 8. From 9 to 10, it was world class. 10 to 11 with the old PWF show with Gordon Soley and Joe Pedicino. And then it was Mid-South. We'd sit there for 4 hours on a Saturday night, me and one of my good friends, and just sit there and get just obliterated and have the time of our lives. Florida wasn't even in the question. Florida wrestling. I mean, we get wasted.
We used to have a few watching the midnight show on WOR TV, like me and 3 or 4 guys, but we just have a couple. We wouldn't get obliterated.
The Florida show or
no,
show?
The WWF show. It started at midnight, so you really couldn't do too much. But I mean, it just brings back so many great memories.
We used to get that here. It was on WOR, right? I'm ring announcer Joe McHugh.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it? Where was it taped? Like Harris, somewhere in Pennsylvania?
Let me see. Why am I having a mind blank? Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Allentown. Yeah. I mean, come on. When Roddy Piper came into WWF, I'm going, wow. Yeah. Now I'm going to watch this crap because I never wanted to watch wrestling from New York until Roddy Piper came in. Now, for me, once Piper got there, it was must-watch TV for me. I loved Roddy Piper. Loved him. I met him on my 30th birthday in West Palm Beach.
Like, what was it like being a Florida fan, living down there, being a wrestling fan, and 1984, the WWF invades your home territory?
It sucked. The first thing you would think of, okay, it's a big deal. It's New York wrestling, but, we already had the chance to see it. on TV, and it just signaled the death of what we grew up on. There was, sooner or later, there's going to be no more Florida wrestling. And that's, basically, yeah, it was a big deal. I mean, me and my friend Greg, we went to see the first WrestleMania at the Hollywood Sportatorium on closed circuit TV. It sucked, but it was a big deal. We'd watch the pay-per-views, but it wasn't the wrestling that we grew up on. And we just, down here, we didn't like the fact that Vince was taking all our guys, like the Briscoes, the Bunks, Dick Slater. Vince was taking our guys and gimmicking them. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, it's over. It was brutal to the hardcore fans like us. I'm sure, Jeff Browner will say the same thing. Greg Good, Barry, Howard Baum, it was brutal. There was no more Florida wrestling. It was over. And that was sad. The New York shit that bored us to tears is now taking over. There's going to be no more blood. There's going to be no more, it sucked. It did. It just sucked. It was depressing. It was part of my life was, gone.
Yeah, that's got to be like a big, you were a fan for 20 years, and to see it become kind of minor league overnight almost, that must have been just brutal.
Well, it wasn't minor league, John. It was just the way the product was presented, and the content of the product. It was more about gimmicky. It was more about the entertainment. Florida. It was always pushed as serious athletic competition. Sooner or later, when you're young, you figured, okay, this isn't on the up and up, but our attitude was make it look good. Kind of like Japan. Make it look good, make it look believable. Don't insult our intelligence. And if you do that, we'll enjoy it and we'll buy a ticket for next week. And that's the way it was back then,
Yeah.
But, as far as when Vince took over, it was sad. It was extremely sad. It was like part of my childhood was taken away. Part of my life was taken away from me. And it sucked.
I totally get it.
It sucked.
Yeah. I want to ask you about 1987, when all of a sudden Crockett's guys, his biggest stars, start appearing on Florida television and the Florida arena shows. And we're talking Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Arn Anderson, Lex Luger, the Rock and Roll Express, etc. What was that like?
Well, it wasn't like a Florida thing. It was like WCW and Turner, it was Crockett took over. For a time, Florida was a B, like a quote-unquote B circuit, where, all of a sudden we're seeing guys like T.J. Khan and Colt Steele, and it was almost like a developmental, it was almost like Ohio Valley Wrestling for Crockett.
Oh.
But still, there are major towns in Florida, Miami, Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville. You're not going to fill the Miami Beach Convention Center. You're not going to fill the Jacksonville Coliseum, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people where T.J. Khan's in your main event. But everyone, they had to send the big stars down, and then Crockett, this is when Crockett was doing the tours. You'd watch the TBS show, and Major League Professional Wrestling, next week we'll be in Michigan. Florida all of a sudden became part of their tour, wherever they were going. Come on, it's back then where Crockett was going everywhere. They were a national company, and, that's when Dusty bought the jet. Hey, Jimmy, let's buy this jet so we can fly everywhere, and all of a sudden, David Crockett's going, hey, Jimmy, we're losing a lot of fucking money here, man. But, as far as us in Florida, we're just another stop on Crockett's national tour. Didn't mean nothing. But we had the show, and like I said, man, we were like Ohio Valley Wrestling. Crockett would send the undercard guys down here. Hey, let's send them down there. If they can get over in Florida, they can get over everywhere. It's up to you, Charlotte.
When Crockett stopped bringing the guys in, and this is right around after Starrcade 87, I don't remember this. Did the Florida promotion fold right away, or did they continue to sputter along?
I mean, whatever was left, I think they folded. And then when Dusty got let go from Crockett, when Turner started talking to Crockett, about, hey, we want to keep you on the network, but, whenever that fiasco ended, Dusty came back down here and he started the PWF with, and that was a freaking fiasco. The Bubblegum Kid and Lou Perez. Yeah, the Big Steel Man. It was horrible. But I hate to say it, but, if I'm sitting here at night, I got a nice buzz on, there's nothing else on TV, I'd watch it. I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess you could say. But, I mean, it was wrestling. There was nothing else. I had to watch it. But it was horrible. There was nothing resembling what I grew up on. And it got to the point where I thought to myself, I can't watch this shit anymore. It's horrible. I mean, I'd rather stick red hot sewing needles in my eyes. I mean, it's fucking terrible. I don't have too many good memories of that period. It's when I started, when WCW started getting good, when the late 80s with Terry, the program with Terry and Rick. Boy, I could tell you a story about crashing Ric Flair's birthday party in Greensboro. That's a whole other story. But, yeah, I just, Florida was just done. It was like stick a fork in it. It's fucking done.
Yeah, Dusty supposedly would go around saying, hey, if the new company doesn't keep me around, I'll just go to Florida and start up again. And when he did that, and this kind of ties into something you were talking about, he started building a big match between himself and Terry Funk. Well, Funk agreed to join the NWA, and the NWA said, hey, don't appear on that show. We don't want an accident to happen to you and have our summer plans destroyed. I mean, they had an active role in kind of killing Dusty's plan. Right.
Well, Dusty had the big match with Terry Funk the night before Flair and Steamboat in Nashville. Me and Jeff Aldrin went to Nashville, and it was the show was on the Sunday night, of course, pay-per-view. But the Saturday night before, Dusty had a big show at the James L. Knight Center in Miami. It was him against Terry Funk. I can't remember the stipulation, but Terry gave the great promo of, I don't want to go down to that rat-infested city of Miami, and it was, I can't remember what the stiff of the match was, but me and Jeff were in Nashville at the time, and I think the crowd that was drawn was underwhelming, but, it was like Dusty grasping at straws. He was trying to hold something together that his luster had, I mean, come on, here's Dusty Rhodes in the 80s, the late 80s, and he was a star, 15, 20 years ago? Yeah. A lot of his fans that just didn't give a shit anymore, or they were watching Hulk Hogan now.
Dusty thought that he could just get back together with Gordon Soley and it would be 1976 again, and that wasn't the case.
Ego. Dusty was an egomaniac, man. He was an egomaniac. Yeah, and he thought he could do it, and it got to the point where, he thought wrong. But, if I'm him, I'm going, hey, man, I had a nice ride while it lasted. I made a hell of a lot of money. And then, he ended up getting a gig with Vince.
He didn't just get a gig. He got a main event gig. I would have never guessed that coming into 1990, whenever it was.
Yeah, well, I'm not talking about the polka dot shit. I mean, talking about afterwards where he's working for NXT and he's working with talent. That's what I meant, I mean, that's what I meant, where he's going, hey, man, I can help talent and I can mean something to the business again. I always thought that was cool. I mean, Dusty meant a lot to Florida. When he turned, it was a huge deal. I mean, when he turned babyface, my God. He turned before I moved to Los Angeles in 77. When I moved back here in 81, I had friends of mine that never had any interest in wrestling, okay? And like in the music industry, when I got a job, with this music distributor that I worked for when they first started out, my boss I'd known him for years and years, and he says, Dave, hey, man, wrestling's coming down next week. Dusty Rhodes, and his nickname was Bunky. His real name was Forrest Wilson. I mean, if your name is Forrest Wilson, you'd want a nickname, wouldn't you? But his name was Bunky. If that was me, I would go, no, I'll stick with my real name. But anyways, he said, Dave, we're going to go. Do you want to go? And, you're a wrestling fan. I said, yeah, sure. So we went to a show at the Hollywood Sportatorium. It was fun, but for me, it sucked. But it was just fun going to a live wrestling show, sitting in the front row. But people, it was almost like back when I was a kid, Eddie Graham and Malenko had this monumental feud. They freaking hated each other back in the 60s. You thought they really hated each other and they really wanted to fucking kill each other. People that never watched wrestling on Saturdays, they knew about the fact that Eddie Graham and Malenko hated each other. That right there says something. They didn't watch the show on Saturdays, but just word of mouth, and they knew who Eddie Graham was. They knew who Malenko was, and they knew they hated each other's guts, quote unquote, but they knew. And that's how important wrestling was in Florida back in like the 60s and the early 70s. It was important. It was freaking amazing. That's what I grew up on. And as the business changed and grew, and, I don't want to say grew, but just changed, and let's leave it at that. Yeah, there were things that made me want to hang on. Thank God for Terry Funk, Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and then I got introduced to Japan stuff. That's what kept my interest alive. And then the late 80s, early 90s, as far as the NWA stuff, okay. But Florida was just done. But then, the WWF stuff was cool. But I was always an NWA Florida guy. Bottom line, NWA guy. But wrestling's wrestling. If I saw a great WWE, WWF, whatever you want to fucking call it, if I saw a great match, I'll be the first one to say that was friggin' incredible. It was fantastic. I mean, John, I was watching the Hell in the Cell match with Foley and The Undertaker. I was sitting there Sunday night, and I get a phone call. Lifford Hobley, who used to play for the Miami Dolphins. He was a safety. He grew up in Louisiana. He was from Metairie, Louisiana. And he said, Dave, because I used to sell CDs to a lot of the Miami Dolphins players. And Lifford and I got to be pretty good friends. And he's, Dave, I'm watching this. I can't believe this shit, man. That motherfucker's dead. I'm going, no, he's not, Lifford. Calm down. And Mark Clayton was sitting with him. And Mark gets on the phone and he says, Dave, he says, man, you used to tell me about this shit. I always thought it was fake as shit. He goes, that motherfucker's hurt. I said, yeah, Mark, how would you feel if you just got your ass slammed through the fucking steel cage and dropped that far? How the fuck would you feel, Mark? And he just started laughing. But back then, okay, this is what I'm dealing with now. I still have to have some wrestling in my life. But, John, the bottom line is I don't give a shit anymore, man. I don't watch anything. That's sad, man. I just don't care.
No, I watch it, but sparingly. But, Dave, we have run out of time. I want to thank you for sharing what was inside your head. There was a lot of good stuff in there, man. Thank you.
I hope I didn't talk too much, man.
No, you were fine. Everyone's heard everything I have to say, so don't worry about it. So, yeah, thank you for coming on.
Hey, if you ever want me back, man, you know where to find me.
I definitely do, and I definitely will. And I want to thank Lightning Lou Kipilman for all the great work he does on this show, making this sound somewhat respectable. I want to thank everyone for listening. Tune in next week, and this has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network.
This concludes our podcast day.